number 10 is the single Link theory. While it's canon that there are different timelines in the series, many fans believe that it's one single Link that goes through every single adventure in every single game. Now, Nintendo popped a hole right in the middle of this theory when they released the official timeline of the Legend of Zelda series, but that hasn't stopped theorists from speculating anyway. And at number 9 is It's a Dream, aka the Zelda Inception theory. No theory list is complete without a dream theory, so Link always starts off every game by waking up. And while this is a common narrative trope in games and other fictional media, some think that in this case it signifies that every game is a dream of Link's, which explains the timelines and how history can repeat itself in the Legend of Zelda universe. And the Inception part? Well, some fans think that rather than every game being a new dream, each time he wakes up in a new game, Link is waking up from the previous dream, aka game. And at number 8 is Cuckoos are immortal. This one is a theory that's been proven in practice. Sort of. So by now you already know that if you attack a cuckoo long enough, they'll let out a cry and their flock will attack you. And there's no actual way to kill them. They'll kill you first. You either have to run away or, well, just run away. This has led many people to believe that cuckoos are invincible, and therefore immortal. No one has yet found a way to kill one. What are your theories on cuckoos? Let us know in the comments below. Personally, I think they might die, but maybe they're just invincible. Up next, number 7 is Talon is Mario. While some people believe there's a deeper meaning rooted in this one, most fans have abandoned this as a theory, considering it to just be a reference to Super Mario Bros. Than anything more substantial. Those who don't think it's an homage have crafted more fanciful theories though, like Talon is Mario once he's retired. Okay, sure, whatever floats your boat. Up next, number 6 is Agatha the Bug Collector. For someone who seems to be a non-consequential supporting character that isn't really all that integral to the main narrative of the game, Agatha sure has raised a lot of questions. In Twilight Princess, she pays Link for bringing her golden bugs. So people were wondering, how does she have so much money? Take a closer look at her appearance and surroundings and it becomes apparent that she's definitely wealthy. This led fans to think that she's potentially Zelda's sister. And because she's been placed in Castletown, maybe there's a reason why the royal family doesn't want her around. Perhaps because she's schizophrenic. Fans argue that this could be the case because of her grandeur delusions towards what she calls the Insect Kingdom, along with a lot of other traits that are similar to the mental disorders. And at number 5 is Epona died in Majora's Mask. This theory comes from Reddit user Scantier, who speculates that after Skull Kid steals Link's ocarina and Epona, Link chases after him and eventually encounters him, in which Skull Kid says this bit of dialogue: "There's no point in riding a thing like that, so I did you a favor and got rid of it." Link then finds a horse's ranch owned by Romani, and learns a song to summon Epona whenever he wants. But here's the thing, how would Romani be able to teach or immediately know the song that would summon Epona, unless he already owned the horse? And it's a different horse, which makes us question whether Skull Kid carried out his threats. Things to also consider. It would be incredibly difficult for Epona to even get into Clocktown in the first place, even if she did escape. And at number 4 is the Dark Link Peter Pan theory. Many fans have debated what the origin of Dark Link is. This dark reflection of Link that he's continuously faced with throughout the series has been speculated to be Link's shadow. That, and similar to Peter Pan, who he shares many aesthetic traits with, is constantly at war with his own shadow. I don't know, what do you guys think? And at number 3 is Majora's Mask is the 5 stages of grief. This one's probably my personal favorite. So this theory explores the idea that Majora's Mask is based off of the Kubler-Ross model of the 5 stages of grief, with the 5 realms you explore symbolizing denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, and that is all reflected in how the NPCs deal with loss in the game. So let's look into this. Clocktown's people are in denial about the moon crashing into the planet. Woodfall's Deku King is filled with anger due to the loss of his daughter and is lashing out at a monkey, who's innocent. In Snowhead, Darmani's ghost begs Link to try to bring him back. Bargaining. And Lulu in Great Bay copes with loss by standing in silence. Depression. Then, lastly, Link climbs the Stone Tower Temple where he gets light arrows, which is supposed to symbolize acceptance. The game theorists go on to theorize that Link is in purgatory and has died and is grieving that, but that is a different theory for another day. And at number 2 is Navi dies at the end of Ocarina of Time. Speaking of death, let's talk about Navi. So Navi disappears at the end of the game, and many think it's because she dies. The evidence? Well, it's speculated that Navi is a part of a race that doesn't seem to have too long of a lifespan. This is due to the fact that the red and pink fairies you find throughout the game also disappear once they fulfill their purpose. Many feel that the theory in our number 3 spot that we just touched on is actually Link experienced grief over Navi's death rather than his own, and that Navi is the beloved friend he is looking for in Majora's Mask. And finally, in at number 1 is the Tetraforce theory. This one is based on the idea that there's a 4th Triforce piece, making it a Tetraforce. Now, the way it's been portrayed in all of the games is always the same, with a missing interesting triangle piece in its middle. This has led to speculation that there's a fourth piece of the Triforce, or Tetraforce. This was further reinforced by the fact that on the Hylian shield there's a yellow triangle beneath the Triforce, right at its bottom. There's barely any evidence from the games that supports this one though, but that hasn't stopped fans from commenting on other things in the game that comes in fours. The 4 light spirits in Twilight Princess, the 4 giants in Majora's Mask, etc, etc. And there's even speculation that there is a fourth goddess in the creation of the Triforce and Ocarina of Time, a goddess named Tetra. And at number 10 are rupees aren't gems. Many video games allow for an unrealistic inventory size, but it's something we generally suspend our disbelief over. For some, that is. This theory spawns from the idea that it wouldn't be possible for Link to carry the large amounts of rupees that one is capable of collecting in the games. The theory suggests that rupees are actually a currency of energy, and that the gems we encounter are simply containers for said energy. And at number 9 is the fierce deity's identity. There's a few theories kicking around as to where the fierce deity stands. One suggests the fierce deity is a god, and Majora is actually a demon. The fierce deity has a gold triangle on its chest, which has led to speculation that it's the fourth piece of the Triforce. Additionally, other fans think that the fierce deity is evil, a much more powerful evil than Majora, who fears it. Then on top of that, there's the theory that it's Link's counterpart, since everyone in Hyrule has a counterpart in Termina. And at number 8 is the Kokiri extinction. During Ocarina of Time, we witnessed 2 different timelines with Link in his childhood and Link in his adulthood. In his childhood timeline, the Kokiri are a peaceful forest race, and are quite present. And in his adulthood, after the Deku Tree dies, at the end of the first dungeon as an adult, the dead tree drops a seed which begins to sprout. But when Link is sent back into his child timeline, he doesn't replant the Deku Tree seed. In Twilight Princess, which occurs in his childhood timeline, there are no Kokiri. This has led many to speculate that their race goes extinct since there was no Deku Tree to protect them, with Link unintentionally being the culprit. And at number 7 is parallel dimensions. With this one being questionable due to the official timelines we've been given, some have speculated that the games happen in parallel dimensions. This theory spawned from Breath of the Wild, operating under the idea that its plot takes place eons after the previous games, which led them to question how discrepancies like the Temple of Time, Rito from Wind Waker, and places being named after characters could exist in that game. Enter the games occurring in parallel dimensions, where they reflect one another, similar to the multiverses we find in comic books. And at number 6 is Super Mario 3 stage play. While this theory has been somewhat confirmed, specifically that Super Mario 3 is a stage play, another theory links that game to Hyrule. The basis of this is that there's a few Super Mario references in the franchise, like the Super Mario Mask in Majora's Mask, and the Bowser clasp that appears in a few games. And the Mario Warp Whistle is similar to the whistle-esque instrument in the first Zelda game. I mean, hey, it could just be Nintendo crossover, but there's a lot of little things that keep popping up. And at number 5 is the Gerudo race evolved into Twilight. A few fans have noted that the Gerudo have all but disappeared from the games, despite evidence of their civilization being prominent in Twilight Princess. Ganondorf, being the one male Gerudo born every 100 years, was their king, and led them into battle against Hyrule. They lost and their population dwindled. Those that remained fled through the Mirror of Twilight, the gateway to the Twilight Realm that you find in the Gerudo Desert. This theory is also supported by Midna telling Link that her people's king fell because of his greed, which some fans have read into as a reference to Ganondorf. And at number 4 is temples in Ocarina of Time. This theory revolves around the idea that the temples in Hyrule in the game are remnants of a holy war. The temples are filled with traps, and incredibly hard to get through at times, plus in complete ruins despite holding very valuable and powerful magical artifacts. This theory suggests that the temples are in this condition because there was a holy war, and that the religion the temples belonged to were eradicated. But the structures still remain despite being damaged. The traps suggest that someone didn't want their magic to be used again, hence the difficulty in traversing through them. The theory by Reddit user The Purple Ghost dives into specifics for each temple and how the areas around them have been tampered with, in a way that feels like they were intentionally secluded, and the full theory is definitely worth checking out. And at number 3, Twilight Princess villains created Majora's Mask. We've talked a lot about Majora's Mask, especially in our previous list, and with a game that rich, it shouldn't be a surprise that more theories circulating it are on this list too. Anyway, this one deals with the Twilight Princess baddies and them creating the Majora's Mask. Long story short, the Sheikah end up getting lost in the Lost Woods, travel through the wormhole to Termina and create the Majora's Mask in order to channel an ancient demon's power. They end up building the stone tower as a tribute to its power, but then they got cocky, and the mask's power got out of control. But the fierce deity saved them, and teleported them back to Hyrule, with no time passing at all there. Twilight Princess occurs earlier in the timeline than Majora's Mask, so it could possibly make sense, and other fans have noticed that there's some similar aesthetics between the two games. And at number 2 is Link is dead. This theory revolves around Majora's Mask as an offshoot of the 5 stages of grief theory that we mentioned in our last list. This theory suggests that Link is in purgatory and is dead. What supports it? The fall through the hole, the almost existential search for a lost friend, Navi, who is likely dead if that theory pans out, and that all the different cities in Termina match up with the 5 stages of grief. Link needs to traverse all of these in order to accept his own death and move on. Plus, Link has an elegy statue like the other characters, all of which appear rather morbid. And finally, at number 1 is Breath of the Wild timeline. Speaking of Link being dead, let's talk about Breath of the Wild. The game opens up with Link waking up, as per usual, except this time he's in a place called the Shrine of Resurrection, hinting to the idea that Link had died. Now let's jump back to Ocarina here. The only time Link's death has been canon was in the alternate timeline in Ocarina, the one called The Hero is Defeated, leading to Ganon destroying Hyrule. And what's happening in Breath of the Wild? This has led to the speculation that Breath of the Wild is the result of that alternate timeline. I don't know, what do you guys think? In at 10, how the Gerudo reproduce. Ever since we first encountered the Gerudo in Ocarina of Time, there's been speculation as to why the race consists primarily of women, minus the one male who is born every 100 years to be their king. More specifically, the theories are concerned with how the race manages to reproduce in between those every 100 years. We know that they travel to nearby towns to mate with males there, yet the Gerudo women still maintain a consistency that doesn't look like other races have bred with them. One person on Reddit came up with the theory that they reproduce via something like gynogenesis, which is a process when the development of an embryo contains only maternal chromosomes, due to activation of an egg by a sperm that degenerates without fusing with the egg nucleus, which creates clone-like offspring, meaning that could explain why they all look so similar. This even helps justify why every 100 years a male is born. The male DNA is typically never carried over, but sometimes it is in rare cases, which is why you get males like Ganondorf, who have other traits of other cultures, like his pointy ears, meaning he could have had a Hylian father. And at number 9, the Ghost Hunter's identity. The Ghost Hunter has popped up twice during the Legend of Zelda franchise, and his identity has always been a mystery that has eluded fans. In his first appearance in Ocarina of Time, he sets up the Ghost Shop in the ruins of the Hyrule Castle town, where he buys Poes whose souls you've trapped in a bottle. He also claims to be capable of reading people's minds. Plus, he has one glowing red eye, which is the only thing visible beneath his hood. Naturally, a few theories have come out of the woodwork about who exactly this Ghost Hunter could be, one being that he was a Hyrulean soldier who Link meets when he is a child, inside that house that would eventually become the Ghost Shop after the town was destroyed. The soldier tells Link that he has an interest in ghosts. In addition to this, other fans have a theory that the Ghost Hunter's identity is the boy who was playing in the Kakariko graveyard, since the stick he would play with bears a similarity to the Ghost Hunters, and the kid is never seen again when Link is an adult. Up next, number 8, the Happy Masked Salesman isn't alive. The Happy Masked Salesman is another character who makes multiple appearances in the franchise over the years, but his most prominent is in Majora's Mask, where he implies that he may be more than just a masked salesman. While there's a lot of theories about his background and identity, one of which argues that he might actually be Majora, one of the more interesting speculations is that perhaps he's a ghost. In Majora's Mask, he tells you that a very important mask was stolen from him, Majora's Mask itself, and upon finding you, he gives you a mission to retrieve it. He says that he went to great lengths to retrieve it in the first place, which he never gives you any details about. Maybe he died. After you defeat Majora and save Termina, you end up giving the now vacant mask to the Happy Masked Salesman, who then walks away and vanishes. Kinda like that unfinished business concept, when a ghost can finally move on once they've completed a task that's been bounding them to the world, their unfinished business. And at number 7, parallel timelines. In one of our previous lists, we discussed the theory that Breath of the Wild takes place during the Hero Defeated timeline. One of the hangups of that theory is that there are a few discrepancies, like places named after older characters, the Temple of Time's existence, and the Rito from Wind Waker. This has spawned a new theory, that there are multiple parallel dimensions with parallel timelines that all contain similar stories, battles of good versus evil, whose original events happened a long time ago, which seems like an interesting explanation, but feels a little bit like a long shot. And at number 6, King Rome's identity. In the early moments of Breath of the Wild, Link encounters an old man who turns out to be King Rome, the last king of Hyrule. While most figured this was just a nice throwback to the old man in the cave from the 1986 The Legend of Zelda game, others noted a different connection Rome potentially shared with another game, the sentient boat that guides Link in Wind Waker, King of Red Lions. We find out at the end of Wind Waker that the King of Red Lions wasn't actually sentient after all, but actually was being controlled by the King of Hyrule, Daphne's Nohansen Hyrule. The two kings do strike a physical similarity, but it seems a little bit unlikely. Up next at 5, the Shadow Temple. Moving into creepier territory for this number, let's talk a bit about the Shadow Temple that appears in Ocarina of Time as the 7th dungeon. It's perhaps the most sinister place in the entire game. There's a theory that believes that the initial intention of the temple was to absorb and concentrate all of the evil and negative feelings within Hyrule, in order to help purify it and prevent it from becoming a corrupt world. Because of all the negativity and malice it was ingesting, it became a torture chamber filled with nightmares. This theory is fueled primarily from the whisperings of the skull paintings within the temple. Up next, number 4, the Zora evolution. Wind Waker takes place in a world that is pretty much covered in water. While you may not pick up on it at first, once you realize that the Zoras are absent from the game, it does seem rather suspicious. This has led many many to speculate that the Zora evolved into another race, the Rito. It's speculated that this evolution was due to Hyrule being flooded by the gods to protect the Triforce from Ganon, whose sea monsters then searched the oceans for it. These monsters would then kill most of the Zora, so they had to adapt, therefore slowly evolving into the Rito. This theory has actually been confirmed, but there isn't any details on how exactly the evolution happened, or what it has to do with our next point. And at 3, Zora and Rito coexisting. As most of you already know, Breath of the Wild happens after Wind Waker. Both the Rito and Zora races appear in that game, causing many to wonder how that happened. Most speculate that the Zora race did survive through Wind Waker, and that only a certain population evolved into Rito by some sort of divine or magical intervention. The Zora in Wind Waker were supposed to receive their wings from some sort of patron deity, as we see in a stone carving in Castletown in Twilight Princess. This has led to speculation that the Zora lived in 2 different geographical zones of Hyrule, one of which became the Rito and the other the Zora who continued to survive and thrive. Others have speculated that the Rito we see in Wind Waker are a different kind of breed than the ones we see in Breath of the Wild, with the latter having a different kind of origin, or being more so evolved from the version in Wind Waker. And at number 2, the sages are deceased. Jumping back to Ocarina of Time, let's take a look at the 7 sages who help Link navigate his quest to defeat Ganondorf. In the game, there are certain sages who help Link with certain temples. Once you progress through a temple, its sage ends up taking a spot in the Chamber of Sages, with their work being complete. This got some people wondering if the sages were killed in their respective temples, since all of the sages were imprisoned in there, and Link's involvement and completion of the temple acts as a way of finishing unfinished business yet again. The theory speculates that Darunia died fighting Volvagia, because he didn't have the Megaton hammer. Then Nabooru is last seen in the Spirit Temple, when she is freed from Twinrova's spell. Ruto swims off to free her people but is never seen again. Impa has been speculated to have been killed by Bongo Bongo, and Saria had rushed to the Forest Temple after it was attacked by evil monsters. She puts out a distress call to Link but is never seen alive again outside of the chamber. All of this has led to the theory that in order to become a sacred sage, your mortal soul needs to die, in order to have your soul then saved by Link and awaken again to become immortal. And at number 1, a eulogy for Satoru Iwata. This one makes our top spot on this list because it's the most plausible of the group, and perhaps the most heartfelt. Back in 2015, the president of Nintendo, Satoru Iwata, died due to complications from cancer. He was largely responsible for revitalizing the company back in the early 2000s, and served as the head developer on the Nintendo Switch during his final months of his life. So how does this tie into Zelda? Well, in Breath of the Wild, there's a man you encounter named Botrick, who looks a whole lot like Iwata. Botwick tells you to go explore a place called Satori Mountain. When you reach the top of the mountain, you'll discover a single cherry blossom tree, with a very ethereal creature beneath it known as the Lord of the Mountain. The game's compendium reads, "This noble creature watches over all animals that makes their home in the forest. Legends say this holy creature is a reincarnation of a sage that died on the lands it now protects. It's something known by its other name, Satori." Now Satori is the root for the name Satoru, and it's also the Japanese Buddhist word for enlightenment.